There's a city that quietly rewired the way humanity eats, and most people walk past the evidence every single day without knowing it. Not Paris, not Rome, not New York, London. A city of fog, empire, gambling clubs, grand hotels, and immigrant kitchens that somehow produced food you have eaten this week. You've eaten it. Your parents ate it, your grandparents ate it, and you almost certainly have no idea it came from a handful of streets between the Thames and Piccadilly. Today, I'm walking you through 10 foods London gave the world. 9 of them will make sense the moment you hear the story. One of them is going to genuinely surprise you, because it's not actually from London at all. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that matters. Let's go. Let's start with the one hiding in plain sight. You have almost certainly eaten a sandwich in the last 24 hours, and you have almost certainly never once wondered where the idea came from, because it seems too simple to have been invented at all. Bread, filling, bread again. But somebody had to be the first person to do it on purpose, write it down, and give it a name. That somebody was John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich in the 1760s. The Earl was a fixture of London's gambling clubs, and the popular legend says he was so devoted to a marathon card game that he refused to leave the table for a proper meal. Instead, he ordered his servants to bring him slices of cold beef tucked between 2 pieces of bread, so he could eat with one hand and keep his cards in the other. Whether or not the card table story is the full truth, some historians think it was actually his work schedule at his desk, not gambling, that demanded the invention. What's certain is that his social circle started ordering the same as sandwich, and the name stuck to the food itself. By the 1770s, travelers were writing home describing this new London eating habit as a curiosity. Within a generation, a sandwich had stopped being a joke about an eccentric aristocrat and had become a category of food. Today, the sandwich is arguably the most eaten food format on Earth. The banh mi in Vietnam, the shawarma wrap in Lebanon, the club sandwich in America, the bocadillo in Spain. Every culture built its own version once the basic concept crossed its borders. All of it traces back to a London gambling table and a man who didn't want to put his cards down. Here's one that sounds so British it feels almost too obvious to include, until you learn that fish and chips is actually a merger of 2 separate immigrant traditions that only became a single dish in London's East End. Fried fish arrived first, brought to London by Sephardic Jewish immigrants from Spain and Portugal in the 17th and 18th centuries, who fried fish in oil as a way of preserving it so it could be eaten cold on the Sabbath. By the mid-1800s, fish and chip shops were common across London's poorer neighborhoods, serving cheap, hot protein to a rapidly industrializing working class. Chips, thick-cut fried potatoes, developed separately, popular in both northern England and London around the same period. The genius move, credited most reliably to Joseph Mallon, who opened a fish and chip shop in London's East End around 1860, was combining the two into a single meal served together, wrapped in newspaper for portability. It was cheap, hot, filling, and portable. Exactly the same logic that would later drive the Chicago hot dog cart decades later, just with cod instead of sausage. By the early 20th century, there were over 25,000 fish and chip shops across Britain, and the dish had become so central to national identity that Winston Churchill reportedly refused to ration it during the Second World War, calling fish and chips the good companions that kept morale up on the home front. Today you'll find fish and chips on menus in Sydney, in Toronto, in Cape Town, anywhere the British Empire once reached, and increasingly everywhere else too. A dish born from 2 immigrant communities solving the same problem in the same city. This one has a name that lies to you immediately. It has nothing to do with Scotland. A whole hard-boiled egg wrapped in sausage meat, coated in breadcrumbs, and fried or baked until golden. It sounds like something from a farmhouse kitchen somewhere in the Highlands. It isn't. It's from a department store on Piccadilly. Fortnum and Mason, the London grocer that opened in 1707 and became a supplier to royalty, claims to have invented the Scotch egg around 1738 as a portable meal for wealthy travelers heading out on long carriage journeys. The logic is almost identical to every other food on this list. People needed something dense, protein-rich, and mess-free that could survive hours of jostling in a coach without a plate, a fork, or a table. Wrap an egg in meat and breadcrumbs and you've solved the problem entirely. The name likely comes from scotching the meat, an old term for mincing or chopping it finely, rather than anything to do with Scottish cuisine, though the exact etymology is still debated by food historians. What isn't debated is the trajectory. The Scotch egg went from Piccadilly picnic food to a fixture of British pub menu, and then out into the world. Today you'll find versions of it, meat wrapped around a boiled egg, breaded and fried, showing up on gastropub menus from New York to Melbourne, almost always retaining that slightly misleading Scottish name for a dish that never once touched Scottish soil at its invention. Now we get to the Savoy Hotel on the Strand in London, and one of the most famous chefs who ever lived, Auguste Escoffier. In 1892, the Australian opera singer Dame Nellie Melba was performing in London and staying at the Savoy. Escoffier, the hotel's head chef, was so taken with her performance in Wagner's Lohengrin that he decided to create a dessert in her honor. He took poached peaches, set them over vanilla ice cream inside a sculpture of a swan carved from ice, a nod to the opera, and finished it with a raspberry puree. He called it Pêche Melba. When Melba returned to the Savoy a few years later and mentioned she was on a strict diet, legend has it Escoffier created a second dish for her: thin, dry, twice-baked toast, stripped of butter and moisture, designed to be as light as possible. He named it Melba toast. Both dishes spread far beyond the hotel that created them. Peach Melba became a staple dessert on menus across Europe and North America throughout the 20th century, while Melba toast became a fixture of hospital trays, cheese boards, and diet food aisles worldwide. One of the few foods whose entire identity is built around removing substance rather than adding it. Two dishes, one singer, one London hotel kitchen, and a global legacy that neither the chef nor the soprano could have predicted. This next one isn't really a single food, it's an entire eating ritual that London invented and then exported to the planet. And it happened because one bored aristocrat got hungry at the wrong time of day. In the 1840s, Anna Russell, the 7th Duchess of Bedford, found herself suffering from what she described as a sinking feeling in the late afternoon. Dinner in fashionable London society had drifted later and later, sometimes not served until 8 or 9 at night, leaving a long hungry gap after a light lunch. The Duchess began quietly requesting tea, bread and butter, and small cakes be brought to her room around 4 o'clock to bridge the gap. She liked the ritual enough to start inviting friends to join her, and by the 1850s, afternoon tea had become a fashionable social event across upper-class London household, complete with its own etiquette: finger sandwiches with the crusts removed, scones with clotted cream and jam, delicate pastries, all served on tiered stands. It wasn't just about food, it was a performance of taste, class, and hospitality, and it spread through London society exactly the way any successful social trend does, because everyone wanted to be seen doing it. Today, afternoon tea is served in hotels from Tokyo to Toronto, often marketed specifically as London style or British afternoon tea, with the tiered stand and the finger sandwiches intact almost 2 centuries later. Very few rituals invented to solve one bored duchess's hunger have gone on to become a global hospitality industry.
Sticky, sweet, spiraled with dried fruit and a sugary glaze, the Chelsea bun looks like a distant cousin of the American cinnamon roll, and in a way, it's the ancestor. It comes from a single bakery, the Chelsea Bun House, which opened in the Chelsea district of London in the early 18th century and became so famous that it was reportedly visited by King George II and George III. The bakery's specific recipe, a rolled yeasted dough layered with butter, brown sugar, and dried currants, coiled into a spiral and baked until the pieces fused together into a shareable slab, became so popular that crowds would reportedly queue by the thousands on Good Friday to buy them, a tradition that lasted for over a century before the original bakery finally closed in the 1840s. The technique of rolling sweet dough around a filling and baking the coils together so that each piece pulls apart from its neighbor is the exact same engineering behind the cinnamon roll, the cardamom bun, and dozens of other spiral pastries found in bakeries across Scandinavia, North America, and beyond. The Chelsea Bun House is long gone, but the shape it invented is baked fresh in cities its founders never could have imagined every single morning.
Here's one where the invention wasn't a recipe so much as a survival strategy that accidentally became one of the most popular drinks on Earth. British officials and soldiers stationed in colonial India during the 19th century needed to take quinine daily to ward off malaria, but quinine on its own is intensely bitter, almost undrinkable. Someone had the idea of mixing quinine powder into carbonated water with sugar, creating an early tonic water, and then cutting the remaining bitterness with gin, sugar, and lime. While the medical use originated in the colonies, it was London that industrialized and popularized both halves of the drink. London had already become the center of a very specific style of gin, London dry gin, a cleaner, less sweetened style than the Dutch Genever that preceded it, distilled by London-based houses that were shipping their product across the empire by the barrel. And it was British trading companies and London chemists, including the firm that would become Schweppes, who commercialized bottled tonic water starting in the 1850s, turning a jungle survival hack into a drink you could order at a bar. By the early 20th century, the gin and tonic had shed its medical origin entirely and become a fixture of British social life, then American cocktail culture, then practically every bar menu on the planet. Today, it's one of the most ordered drinks in the world, and almost nobody sipping one at a rooftop bar in Singapore or a cafe in Lisbon is thinking about malaria prevention. But that's exactly where the ratio of gin to tonic and the wedge of lime actually comes from.
This is the one that comes with a genuine, ongoing controversy, and I love including it precisely because the argument itself tells you something important. Ask 10 people where chicken tikka masala was invented, and you'll get several different, very confident answers. Glasgow has its own strong claim, tied to a specific origin story about a chef adding canned tomato soup to dry chicken tikka for a customer who wanted gravy. But London has its own equally strong claim, rooted in the wave of Bangladeshi and Punjabi immigrant chefs who opened curry houses across the city starting in the 1960s and 70s, adapting tandoori chicken recipes for British palates that wanted a creamier, milder sauce than traditional tandoori serving styles offer. What's not disputed is this: chicken tikka masala, as most of the world eats it, pieces of marinated, char-grilled chicken in a smooth tomato and cream-based spiced sauce, is a dish invented in Britain by South Asian chefs cooking for British customers, not a dish that exists in this specific form in India itself. It's a fusion food, created in immigrant kitchens, navigating a new country's tastes, and London's enormous concentration of South Asian restaurants throughout the second half of the 20th century made it the dish's most powerful launching pad, regardless of exactly which kitchen served the very first plate. In 2001, the British Foreign Secretary at the time famously called chicken tikka masala a true British national dish, pointing to it as a symbol of multicultural Britain. Today, it's sold in supermarkets from Dubai to Chicago in a jar, ready to heat, a dish invented by immigrants for their new home that then became one of that home's most successful culinary exports.
Eggs, bacon, sausages, baked beans, grilled tomato, mushrooms, toast, and a strong cup of tea. The full English breakfast is less a single food than a codified national ritual, and like afternoon tea, its final standardized form came together specifically in London. The tradition draws on the much older concept of the English country house breakfast, a lavish buffet-style morning meal served to Victorian aristocrats and their guests after a morning of hunting or riding. But it was London's growing hotel and railway industry in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, feeding travelers and businessmen who needed one substantial standardized meal before a long day, that compressed the country house spread down into the fixed plated combination we recognize today, and then served it identically in hotels and railway cafes across the entire country. That standardization is exactly why the full English exists as a single nameable thing, rather than just a big breakfast. It has rules, it has expected components, and because London's hospitality trade exported that fixed format so effectively, first across the British Isles, then across the Empire, then into hotel breakfast buffets worldwide, the English breakfast is now a specific, recognizable menu item in hotels from Bangkok to Buenos Aires, usually served exactly the way London standardized it more than a century ago.
And now, the one I promised would surprise you. London broil. It sounds like the most obviously London food on this entire list. It has the city's name built directly into it. Surely, out of everything here, this is the one dish we can say with total confidence came from London. It didn't. London broil isn't from London at all. It was invented in North America. Most food historians trace it to restaurants and home cooks in the United States and Canada sometime in the mid-20th century, likely the 1930s to 1950s, as a way of describing a specific cooking method for a cheap, tough cut of beef, usually flank steak, marinated, broiled quickly at high heat, then sliced thinly against the grain to make it tender enough to chew. There is no dish called London broil native to London, no London restaurant that claims to have invented it, and no historical record connecting the name to the city in any culinary sense whatsoever. Nobody is entirely certain why the name was chosen. The leading theory is simply that London sounded sophisticated and vaguely European to mid-century North American diners, the same instinct that put French in front of fries that weren't French and Danish in front of pastries that were largely popularized in Vienna. It was branding, not geography, a marketing decision dressed up as a place name. And that's the twist worth sitting with. 9 dishes on this list carry no obvious clue to their origin at all. The sandwich doesn't sound like London. The Scotch egg sounds like Scotland. Gin and tonic sounds like nothing in particular. And yet every one of them genuinely traces back to specific London kitchens, hotels, and streets. Then the one dish that announces its origin in its own name, loudly, confidently, London broil, has nothing to do with the city whatsoever. Food history rarely works the way the labels tell you it does. You've eaten a sandwich. You've ordered fish and chips. You've had tea at 4 o'clock without knowing why 4 o'clock exists at all. London built more of your everyday eating habits than you ever gave it credit for, and the one food that tried hardest to convince you otherwise was lying the whole time.